The arrogance of Hollywood is amazing. These are people which have destroyed so many IPs and yet think that they produce the best of everything, even when they don't put any effort in. This is how we end up with this story from Bounding Into Comics. The Last of Us star Pedro Pascal says he wanted to create a healthy distance between the live-action series and the original game, and that is code for he couldn't be bothered to play them, look them up, or even watch a video about it before he decided to take on the role and act a character that he has no idea who he is. If you wanted the most glaring sign that this show is going to be ass, there you go, folks. That's the amount of effort he's putting into it. The simultaneous arrogance and ignorance required to say something like this is so astronomical. It could only have come from a Hollywood star. Because let's face it, this is a guy most well known for playing the Mandalorian. A role where the helmet was never removed from the character and so only required the talent of your inbred cousin Steve. Or at least he shouldn't have removed his helmet, but he did campaign for it for a long time, so unfortunately we got to see his face. Because you see, well, Hollywood is full of people where if they shook your hand, you'd count your fingers afterwards. They also think that they, just by virtue of existing, are clearly superior to any other medium on the face of the planet. It doesn't matter what the IP is. It doesn't matter how many IPs they've destroyed, no. Their version of it is definitely the best. Movies see themselves better than television, and television sees itself better than everything else. They don't care about your games, art, or book series. It doesn't matter how much disdain they treat that IP with, or how little effort they put in, just by virtue of them making it. Their version is obviously the best. That is how you end up with this attitude from Pedro Pascal. The guy who can't even be bothered to watch the game of the major role he's about to take part in. Where the GQ interviewer asks, finally, I am the biggest fan of The Last of Us, to which Pedro replies, did you play the game? I mean, how else do you think the guy is a fan of it? I do have to ask. But he says, it's so sad, I haven't any skill. I tried, you know. Oh, it's such a pain for the Hollywood actor to actually lower himself to play a game. I'm getting millions of pounds to play this role, but it's just so difficult to pick up a PlayStation controller. But it's not as if he tried very hard for his millions of pounds, no, because it was only a matter of minutes before I had to hand it to my nephew, because quite frankly, he can't be bothered. And it really takes a specific kind of skill, and I don't have it. I don't know, maybe you don't have it, because you only put minutes into actually ever trying. It's not as if The Last of Us is a really difficult game. If games journalists can manage it, you certainly can, Pedro. Pretty sure I can match their level of skill if I was comatose in a hospital wing. Did you watch your nephew play the whole thing through? And he says, I watched as long as I was able to that day. You what? What else are you busy doing? Defecating on game CDs of it or something? Seriously, you get paid so much money for this and you can't even be bothered to sit down in one place and watch a playthrough of it. But don't worry, because he's got a good excuse. Yeah, he had to leave Florida, and obviously The Last of Us only exists in Florida, and you certainly can't hop on YouTube from any other place in the world. I mean, this is a guy who could have gone on a flight and just watched it there, but apparently no. I mean, that's too big brain for someone from Hollywood. They couldn't possibly do that. Don't worry, though. Despite the fact that he probably watched it for just a few minutes, he did find Joel very impressive. Which is lucky, considering that's the role he's going to crap on. But then I got worried that I would want to imitate it too much. Yeah, that's always my biggest problem when I'm actually asking a guy to play a role. That he might be too much like the guy. Oh, what's your biggest problem as an actor? Well, I do find that my biggest problem with an actor is that I'm just too good at it, and no one can tell me from the original character that I'm trying to imitate. And I think that could be right in some circumstances, you know, any circumstances where acting is required, and a mistake in others. Yeah, it'd be a mistake to actually imitate Joel if you were the Mandalorian. But in any circumstance where you're actually meant to act as Joel in The Last of Us, imitating Joel is basically your entire job. So I just wanted to create a healthy distance. In other words, he couldn't be bothered. And he didn't think it was required to actually put in any work at all, and for some reason think that you can just strut in there, act as yourself, because you can't act as Joel because you have no idea what Joel is like, and yet you're still expecting the same amount of money that we paid you when we thought you could actually do the job properly. And this is the arrogance of Hollywood, because he thinks that just by him existing, just by them coming out and making something that has the Last of Us brand stamped on it, and it doesn't matter how much like The Last of Us it actually is, it doesn't matter, because Hollywood made it, and anything they make is by default the best. It's better than the game is, it fixes all of those games' problematic little issues, because after all, The Last of Us is just a game. And this is an attitude we've seen in so many other places, and justified by so many other people. We saw it all the time with Halo. The Halo show is nothing like the games, and that's why it's good. Because the Halo show is a TV show. It's not a game, so it's immediately better. And in fact, leaving behind everything the IP actually was is probably for the best, because that just came from one of those, the childish games, the things that those smelly teenagers play on. It doesn't matter about anything else. It's not actually as if it is beloved by millions of people. No, and even if it was, they're just gamers. What we really want is those Hollywood aristocrats to come in and tell us how things are really done. That's why in Halo, the showrunners were absolutely correct in their choice to not look at the games at all, and why they were just comfortable in coming out and admitting that we didn't even look at the game. We didn't talk about the game. No, we talked about the characters and the world, the ones that they're going to be making up and fabricating that never existed in the first place. And that is why I never felt limited by it being a game. Because games are limiting, the IP which allows you to completely immerse yourself in the actual thing and play the role yourself. That's too limiting. Yeah, it's far less limiting when you're making something in Hollywood and have to deal with people who are so arrogant they can't even go an entire series without taking their helmet off. Oh, they really need to see my face! And that's why he can't even be bothered to play the game, because he's got to get his money anyway, and everyone involved in it will be so busy sniffing their own farts they'll think they've clearly made something superior, when what they've made is probably not going to be The Last of Us at all. Not least because the main character has no idea what The Last of Us even is, because he's never even watched a playthrough of it. If I was getting paid millions of dollars to do something, I'd go away and read everything, watch everything, play everything in the entire universe, immerse yourself in it, because it's worthy of that respect, and you're getting paid enough to make it worth your while. But that's too much for our Pedro, who instead would rather just do some flouncy actor language, something that everybody can see through. Like, there's a very, very creative way of honoring what's important, also preserving what is iconic to the experience of the video game, which is something he wouldn't know anything about because he's never played it. And also to include things you wouldn't necessarily expect, and then directions that you would expect it to go. And it might not. Because you see, the game, because there's only one, that had problems. The people that made it, they were awful. I mean, I know you like it. I know millions and millions of people love the IP, and actually the games are the only reason the TV shows even got made, because it's so popular. But it was made by game designers, and let's face it, they're not as talented as the people in Hollywood. That's the attitude that's giving off here. Those game designers sent it in directions I never would. And now Hollywood is here with its massive talent to save the day and send it in the right directions, the correct directions. They think they're so amazing on their ivory tower, looking down upon the ants, that they can do no wrong. They could take any IP, and just by virtue of them making it, it will obviously be better, to the point where they don't even have to try to make it like the original IP, because their natural creative genius will just make something far superior than anything a simple game designer could. That's how you end up with stories like the Halo show is nothing like the games, and that's why it's good. And that is how you end up in a situation where a guy won't even be bothered to play the original IP, even understand anything about his role, because he's too busy being concerned that he might actually do a good job if he does. No, I wouldn't want to be too much like the IP. I want to be Pedro Pascal. Which is weird when everyone was expecting Joel. A good actor would be indistinguishable from Joel, and a bad actor, say someone called Pedro, would just come along and act as Pedro, because that's literally the only role he can even play. But who knows, maybe if this incoming dumpster fire makes it to a season 2, we might actually get into The Last of Us 2. And spoiler warning, but hey, it's gonna make his face look particularly interesting. 4! And if there's one thing that bad actors are good at, it's milking a death scene. Although maybe that's one of the unexpected directions they're going to be taking the show in. I mean, it would mean cutting Abby, but that would be perfectly reasonable to do, because let's face it, they're not going to be finding a woman that looks like that in real life. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you made it this far, you clearly liked the video, so press like, subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.